It is primary day in a number of states across the country, and there are several races that are really important to progressives in particular. So we've got the perfect person to break it all down for us. Great friend of the show and DC Bureau Chief for The Intercept, Ryan Grimm. Great to see you, Ryan. So Ryan, what races do you have your eye on today?
I mean, the kind of marquee progressive ones are, Cori Bush taking on Lacey Clay for a St. Louis congressional seat, and then also Beth Dolio, who's a progressive backed by both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and also the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which has spent a lot of money to try to help her win a competitive primary. That's a particularly interesting race for kind of the mainstream Democratic caucus, because it's similar to the Mondaire Jones situation in suburban New York, where in a typical year, the candidate that's going to win that race is going to be a kind of pro-business New Dem who has a ton of money and is able to persuade all of the voters of that district that they're the most progressive Democrat. And so then you have these deep blue districts that continue sending these kind of pro-business Democrats to Washington. Mondaire Jones was the first one to break that pattern. He did so with significant support from people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, but also significant spending from the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which they had never done before. And so this is the second time that they're really intervening in a race. They've spent at least $150,000 behind Dolio, and she's running against two candidates who, for all intents and appearances, look to be quite progressive. They say the right things on the stump, but what the intervention by people like Sanders and the CPC does is it tells voters, no, actually there is a difference between these. For instance, this candidate, ran the Seattle Chamber of Commerce when they tried to flip the Seattle City Council away from the kind of progressive socialist coalition into one that supports Amazon. And so that candidate, for instance, is the one that the Seattle newspaper endorsed for this seat. So absent the kind of progressive intervention, that's the candidate that kind of waltzes into this seat, and that's how you get the Democratic Party that you have today. Obviously, Kansas is a really interesting one too. For Democrats, you've got, they're closely watching the Republican Senate race to see if Kobach can pull that off, and then put the Senate race in play. Meanwhile, Lawrence, in Lawrence, Kansas, as The Intercept has written about, there's a kind of radical prosecutor running there, which is an awful lot of fun. Considering Kansas's history, Lawrence was founded by abolitionists, who moved from Massachusetts to do actual physical bloody battle, with the slave owners in Missouri who were trying to turn Kansas into a slave state. So it's fascinating to see now, 150 years later, a radical might actually claim the district attorney's seat in Lawrence.
Really interesting.
So, Ryan, I'm kind of curious. I come at this from my experience on the right, which is, conservatives sort of taking on the Republican establishment, institutionalizing around their own candidates. And it's pretty violent, I won't lie. You're seeing a little bit of that play out right now in the Kobach, Roger Marshall situation. But I'm curious if it's similar on the left, right? You're seeing the institutional rise of a lot of these progressive candidates with more money and more institutional support than they've ever had. So what has been the establishment DNC response to these races in particular?
Well, it's gotten incredibly ugly in St. Louis with the Lacey Clay Cori Bush ad. Lacey Clay Jr. and his father have held that seat, will be for I think 52 years. If he wins re-election, though they are a dynasty in St. Louis, and they are not going to loosen their grip on that seat gently. He recently sent around a mailer that kind of darkened Cori Bush's face and put her next to an image of Linda Sarsour, and said that that Cori Bush stands with BDS and against Israel, and if you elect a vote for Cori Bush, is a vote against Israel. And Cori Bush responded by saying that Lacey Clay was putting Muslim lives in the district in danger by circulating this image of Linda Sarsour in a hijab and suggesting that there's something scary and un-American about Sarsour and about Bush. And so, that's kind of been maybe the most intense back and forth, but it's all been ugly. Clay has gone negative on television, which is highly unusual because, incumbents would much prefer to just simply ignore their challenger, or if they go up on television, to just talk about their record. Like Joe Crowley, for instance, Richie Neal, they both talk about their record, talk about how they've defeated Trump. They sort of don't, they've gone after Trump. They don't want to lower themselves by going negative against the incumbent, but it's a reflection of how seriously Lacey Clay is taking the challenge by Cori Bush that he has gone so negative. He's hit her for her nursing license lapsed for a very short period of time. She had some back taxes, which almost everybody in the country has had back taxes at one point. He hit her for that. He has basically said that her life experience to this point does not qualify her to be a member of Congress. Cori Bush obviously is rose to prominence as a leader of the Ferguson protests.
Yeah, I mean, I saw some of the mailers in that race, and they were some of the most vicious things that I have seen in politics, and I've seen a lot of things in politics.
The one amazing thing that was on a mailer, speaking of those mailers, Lacey Clay hugging close to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Clay has been, one of the most outspoken public critics of the squad, and has been willing to kind of pick fights with them. He's happy to call Justice Democrats objectively racist in how they go about their strategy of going after incumbents. But in a mailer in the district, he said, my opponent likes to suggest that she would be similar to the squad, but I work very closely with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in Washington. She's my colleague, and I stand with her. And to see that coming from him was quite a remarkable shift, and was the first indication you started to see of Democrats going the way that Republicans did, amid and after the Tea Party wave, where the Tea Party only knocked off a handful of incumbents, and then every incumbent said, "Well, actually, I'm a Tea Party guy."
Right.
This was the first indication of a kind of move in the direction of the squad and of the insurgency, rather than going to war with it.
And a couple of the squad members facing challenges as well. I know Rashida Tlaib in particular. Are any of them in danger here?
I think Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar are both taking their races extremely seriously. Tlaib had two elections, bizarrely, against her current opponent in 2018. She won one of those races by about 1,000 votes, and she lost one of those by about 1,000 votes. It's too complicated to get into why there were two elections. Suffice to say there were. And given the fact that it was that close in a crowded field, now that it's just one-on-one, Tlaib has to take it very seriously. Now, Tlaib has out-organized and out-fundraised Brenda Jones massively. And so, I think she's in pretty good position, but she can't take it for granted. Ilhan Omar's opponent has raised an extraordinary sum of money, more than $3 million in a single quarter, which is just extremely unusual for a challenger. He seems to have all of the apparatus of the consultants who otherwise are not supposed to work for challengers to incumbents, but the rule doesn't seem to apply if they're going after Ilhan Omar. So, she is very popular in the district. Polls have her comfortably ahead, but these are very difficult times to poll, and with the amount of money that he has, neither of them can be considered to have cakewalks.
Very interesting stuff. Great breakdown. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, guys.
Next on Rising, change is afoot over at MSNBC. Friend of the show, Kyle Klinsky, is going to talk about what he thinks those moves all mean and add up to when Rising continues.